Chapter 25, The Triple Transformation. I'd like to begin with reading from the Letters of Yoga, The Triple Transformation. I think it's important to understand what we're reading in the Life Divine in terms of definitions and a deeper understanding of what it means. What is the triple transformation? In the Letters on Yoga, when Sadhaks wrote to Sri Aurobindo, he explained it very clearly and precisely, which of course he does, but he does it in a more philosophical sense in the Life Divine. So, the triple transformation, psychic, spiritual, supramental. The fundamental realizations of this yoga are: 1. The psychic change, so that a complete devotion can be the main motive of the heart and the ruler of thought, life, and action, so that a complete devotion can be the main motive of the heart and the ruler of thought, life, and action in constant union with the mother and in her presence. It's the first fundamental realization. What is the second? The descent of the peace, power, light, etc. of the higher consciousness through the head and heart into the whole being, occupying the very cells of the body. Please note the words. This is the descent occupying the very cells of the body. This is not the descent only into the mind. It is the descent of the higher consciousness through the head and through the heart into the whole being, occupying the very cells of the body. That is the second transformation. Now, if you don't understand these three, this is the fundamental. If you understand this whole chapter is clear. The third, the perception of the one and divine infinitely everywhere. What is the third? The perception of the one and divine infinitely everywhere. The mother everywhere. And living in that infinite consciousness. Now, he doesn't say here the supramental in words. But how will you get this perception of the one and the divine infinitely everywhere and at all times, and to see the mother everywhere living in that infinite consciousness? How will you get that perception?
Cosmic consciousness, like the experience Sri Aurobindo had in the jail where he saw Krishna everywhere. What would be the difference?
So that is the cosmic consciousness. And this is the perception of the one and divine infinitely everywhere, the mother everywhere, and living in that infinite consciousness. I suppose in a way that one is leading up to the other. My own perception is that while these are the fundamental realizations of the yoga, the third realization prepares you for the supramental change. It is not the supramental. The supramental comes only after this. That is my perception because...
Are these the three steps?
No, these are the three realizations of this yoga. The other thing that could have happened is that the supramental realization is something that Sri Aurobindo became more and more clear about little later in his own yoga. So, in the sense that he himself was in the overmental consciousness. When he ascended, he started understanding that the difference between the overmind and the supermind. So it could also be this reason. We have to see the year this letter was written at. This is the problem with these letters on yoga. There is no question as name. There is no date. There is nothing. Somebody's cut off the head, cut off the feet, and kept the center of the being and put it. This is not the way that letters should have been written. It's very important to get the context, the time, so that you understand deeply. But anyway, these are the three fundamental realizations, but I think the third realization is the stepping stone towards the supramental, because if you see the supramental realization, it is not this. The supramental realization is when the body is a combination of the second and third, in fact. So supramental is when the body consciousness becomes, there is more to it than these. These are, I think, what Sri Aurobindo had first written out as the realizations of his yoga, and I think all three culminate in the supramental. That is my impression.
Supramental, see Sri Aurobindo, the supermind descended in.
It came after he passed away. But even in the supermind, he said that the supramental will first come into a few people only. It will then spread after that many, many years. So there will be... No. Supermind was only the Sri Aurobindo. And that also later, when it descended in 1956 in the earth consciousness, he had already brought down the supramental principle into his own body, but that he did at the time of his transition from this body to another, 1950. He had realized it, but in the collective consciousness, the earth consciousness, it descended in 1956. Okay, so you know the three things. Now the next letter. You know the three things on which the realization has to be based: on a rising to a station above the mind, and on the opening of the out of the cosmic consciousness. So the rising and then the opening out into the cosmic, out of the cosmic consciousness, and on the opening out of the cosmic consciousness. Okay, that's one. Second, on the psychic opening. So these are the three things on which these above realizations are based: the psychic opening, the rising to the station above the mind and opening to the cosmic consciousness. On the descent, the third is the descent. So there's ascent, there's the inward movement, and then there is the descent of the higher consciousness with its peace, light, force, knowledge, ananda, into all the planes of the being, down to the most physical. So this down to the most physical will happen only when the supramental, later he realizes, influence is there. All this has to be done by the working of the mother's force. So how is this to be done? By the working of the mother's force, aided by your aspiration, devotion and surrender. So that's why in this yoga, the divine is the sadhaka and the sadhana. It's she who does the sadhana in us. It is her power and her action in us that prepares and can change our nature. But for that, the effort of the sadhak is required, the triple effort of aspiration, rejection and surrender. So here you have all of that coming in. Okay, so that is the path. The rest is a matter of the working out of these things, for which you have to have faith in the mother's working. So again, the importance of faith. When one speaks of the divine spark, one is thinking of the soul as a portion of the divine which has descended from above into the manifestation, rather than of something which has separated itself from the cosmos. It is the nature that has formed itself out of the cosmic forces, mind out of cosmic mind, life out of cosmic life, body out of cosmic matter. For the soul, there are three realizations: the realization of the psychic being and the consciousness as the divine element in the evolution, the realization of the cosmic self, which is one in all, the realization of the supreme divine, from which both individual and cosmos have come, and of the individual being Jivatman as the eternal portion of the divine. So the psychic being stands behind the heart, supporting the mind, life and being. So what does the psychic being do? We've been reading about the psychic being in the Triple Transformation chapter. The psychic being stands behind the heart, supporting the mind, supporting the life and supporting the body. In the psychic transformation, there are three main elements. What are the three elements? The opening up of the occult mind. The opening of the occult inner mind. You remember in the chapter, Sri Aurobindo keeps speaking of the inner mind, the inner vital and the inner physical. So, for this psychic transformation to take place, the opening of the occult inner mind, inner vital and inner physical. That is the first thing. There are three main elements. What are the three main elements? For the psychic transformation to happen, the psychic being stands behind. In the psychic transformation, there are three main elements. What are they? One, the opening of the occult inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, so that one becomes aware of all that lies behind the surface mind, the surface life and the body. Two, the opening of the psychic being or soul, by which it comes forward and governs the mind, life and body, turning all to the divine. So second step, after the opening of the inner mind, inner vital and inner body, the opening or coming forward of the psychic being or soul, and by which it comes forward and governs the outer mind, the outer life and the body, turning all to the divine. Third, the opening of the lower being to the spiritual truth. So what is the lower being? This last may be called the psycho-spiritual part of the change. It is quite possible for the psychic transformation to take one beyond the individual into the cosmic. Even the occult opening establishes a connection with the cosmic mind, cosmic vital, cosmic physical. The psychic realizes the contact with all existence, the oneness of the self, the universal love, and other realizations would lead to the cosmic consciousness. But all that is a result of the opening to the spiritual above, and it comes by an infiltration or reflection of the spiritual light and truth in mind, life and body. So on. Then it talks about the spiritual transformation. What is a spiritual transformation? The spiritual transformation proper begins or becomes possible when one rises above the mind and lives there, governing all from above. Even in the psychic transformation, one can rise above by a sort of going above of the mental, vital, physical being and a return. But one does not yet live above in the summit consciousness, where overmind has its seat with the other planes that are above the human mind. So the spiritual consciousness is a living above all the reaches of mind in the over-mental consciousness. Living there. The person who did that and was living in the over-mental consciousness, one of Sri Aurobindo's disciples was doing that. Who was it? And he was called the Manas Putra of Sri Aurobindo. Nolinida. He called him my Manasputra. He was living in this consciousness. So, because in the earlier years, Sri Aurobindo, when he started his sadhana, all his friends who became his disciples, they also started their sadhana in the old way, from the rising up from the mind levels. They did not go through the new way, which is the sunlit path of the mother, which she brought in with the psychic being. So the old way was the old yoga, that very, very much more strenuous, much more hazardous in a way, but also it was a different path. So they all went through the mind levels. The later sadhaks, Amal Kiran, Nirodha, all of them who came, so many others, Dyuman Bhai, they went through the psychic way because the mother had come by then. So their yoga and their sadhana was different from the earlier disciples of Sri Aurobindo, Anil Baran, Nalinida, who were the earlier disciples, Pavitrada, A.B. Purani. So theirs was the other. So even in the psychic transformation, one can rise above by a sort of going above of the mental, vital, physical being and a return, but one does not yet live above in the summit consciousness, where overmind has its seat with the other planes that are above the human mind. So above the human mind, when that seat, when you live in that consciousness, then you can say you have the spiritual realization. But this is not easy to live there. And it is quite a sadhana to actually go ascending into the highest over mental consciousness. Now, this is the second realization, the spiritual. Now he says, what is the supramental? So I don't know what date he wrote this letter, but in this letter he says, the supramental transformation can only come when the lid between the lower and higher hemispheres or halves of existence is removed and the supermind instead of the overmind becomes the governing power of the existence. So what becomes the governing power of the existence? The supermind instead of the overmind. So when this lid is removed between the lower hemisphere, the top of the lower hemisphere is the overmind and the other hemisphere is the supermind. So when that golden lid in the Isha Upanishad, there is a golden lid between the light of the 1,000 suns and our illumination.
The transformations of the psychic,
the spiritual and the supramental, yeah. The supramental transformation can only come when the lid between the lower and higher hemispheres or halves of existence is removed and the supermind instead of the overmind becomes the governing power of the existence. But of that nothing can be spoken now. So Sri Aurobindo is quite clear. He does not want to speak about this right now. Between psychicization and spiritualization, there is a difference. So somebody's asked him, what is the difference between psychicization and spiritualization? The spiritual is the change that descends from above. The psychic is the change that comes from within by the psychic dominating the mind, vital and physical. Okay? So one is a change that descends from above and the other is a change that comes from within. So what does psychicization mean? The change of the lower nature, bringing right vision into the mind, right impulse and feeling into the vital, right movement and habit into the physical, all turned towards the divine, all based on love, adoration, bhakti. Finally, the vision and sense of the mother everywhere in all. So again, he goes back to this. The mother everywhere in all, as well as in the heart, her force working in the being, faith, consecration, surrender. So that is psychicization. When this happens in you, then your nature has become psychicized. What happens in you? right vision in the mind, right impulse and feeling in the vital, right movement and habit in the physical, all turned towards the divine, all based on love, adoration, bhakti. Finally, the vision and sense of the mother everywhere. When you see the mother everywhere, you only see the mother in all, as well as in the heart. Her force working in the being, her force full, completely filling your entire being. Faith, consecration, surrender. Now, what is the spiritual change? The spiritual change is the established descent of the peace, light, knowledge, power, bliss from above, the awareness of the self and the divine, and of a higher cosmic consciousness, and the change of the whole consciousness to that. So I just wanted to read this before we continue. So last time we had ended where we had talked about this practice. That was the last time. But what was the practice that Sri Aurobindo had spoken about? What we said we'll... But the practice we had ended with was the practice of the Purusha and Prakriti, which is the detachment, the separation to be able to live in the inner being and not get caught in the outer external being. That was the practice. So, this was the practice we had talked about at the end. Yeah. One effective way often used to facilitate this entry into the inner self is a separation of the Purusha, the conscious being, from the Prakriti, the formulated nature. If one stands back from the mind and its activities so that they fall silent at will, or go on as a surface movement of which one is the detached and disinterested witness, it becomes possible eventually to realize oneself as the inner self of mind, the true and pure mental being, the Purusha. By similarly standing back from the life activities, it is possible to realize oneself as the inner self of life, the true and pure vital being, the Purusha. There is even a self of body, of which by standing back from the body and its demands and activities and entering into a silence of the physical consciousness, watching the action of its energy, it is possible to become aware, a true and pure physical being, the Purusha. So too, by standing back from all these activities of nature, successively or together, it becomes possible to realize one's inner being as the silent, impersonal, the witness Purusha. Now, so too by standing back from all these activities of the outer nature, successively or together, it becomes possible to realize one's inner being as the silent, impersonal self, the witness Purusha. This will lead to a spiritual realization and liberation, but not necessarily bring about a transformation. So this practice will lead to a spiritual realization and liberation, but will not necessarily bring about a transformation. For the Purusha, satisfied to be free and himself, may leave the nature, the Prakriti, to exhaust its accumulative impetus by an unsupported action, a mechanical continuance not renewed and reinforced or vivified and prolonged by his consent, and use this rejection as a means of withdrawing from all nature. The Purusha has to become not only the witness, but the knower and source, the master of all the thought and action. And this can only be partially done so long as one remains on the mental level, or has still to use the ordinary instrumentation of mind, life and body. A certain mastery can indeed be achieved, but mastery is not transformation. The change made by it cannot be sufficient to be integral. For that, it is essential to get back beyond mind being, life being, body being, still more deeply inward to the psychic entity, inmost and profoundest within us. So for the transformation, one has to go get into the psychic being. So this can help in at least detaching yourself from identifying yourself from the outer nature, from the ego, and from the ego in the mind, the vital ego, the mental ego, and the physical ego, and also give you a sense of the subtle beings that are behind it. However, the aspiration, intensity of aspiration, calling to the mother is essential if one has to go and reside in the psychic being or discover the psychic being. Our psychic being cannot come forward by a mechanical practice however high, however deep, however strenuous that practice may be, it can only come about by an intensity of devotion and love for the Mother, for the Shakti, for that divine presence and for that light. If there is no devotion and bhakti, the heart does not aspire for the Mother and to come in touch with her, you cannot reach your psychic being. It is when your soul is ready. Yes, it is a gift of grace. And it is also when the soul is mature enough and feels the need for something deeper and higher. That is when the psychic comes forward. And the two steps that Sri Aurobindo talked about. The first step was, in that talk in IGNU, somebody asked, what are the two great steps of your yoga? What is the first step? The aspiration for a divine life. What is the second? Openness and surrender to the Mother. Calling the Mother. Yeah. These, you come back to that. Whatever you do, you come back to that. If you don't have these two, you cannot come in touch with your psychic. Your psychic being cannot come forward. Why?
Because it is through the grace of the Mother that happens.
Yes.
And also, similar to what Jyoti is saying, you have this Purusha thing. The Purusha is detached.
Yes. Yeah, that's why you can leave your outer nature, as Sri Aurobindo said. So, therefore, the whole yoga changed. I want to tell you this again and again and again. In the 1930s, Sri Aurobindo's yoga completely changed. And he said that after the Mother came, she brought what I was looking for. She embodied that. And he said that after that, if you see that's why the seminal book of his yoga is The Mother by Sri Aurobindo. That book gives you the practices of the real integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, the yoga of transformation. For the nature to be transformed, it is the Mother who can transform our nature. And if you see the whole book and the whole methodology of his yoga after the Mother came and what he wrote before is quite different. So, you have to remember that. So parts of the Life Divine were written before, but the last 5 chapters were written afterwards and revised. So you will see in the last 5 chapters mention of the psychic all the time. You will not see it in the beginning so much, or in the the Vedantic thing of knowledge and the reality and cosmic illusions and indeterminates and cosmic determinations and all that. You will not see that there, but you will see it in the last 5 chapters. That is why the Mother, when someone asked her that what should we read in the Life Divine, she said, just read the last 5 chapters. Why do you think she said that? You think she was... because she understood the practical aspect of the yoga is in the last 5 chapters. It is very different. So, we are reading that, don't worry. However, so listen to what he's saying. That's why in this chapter he's saying this, that this is not enough. You cannot just go up and say, this will not give you transformation. This will give you realization. The old yoga stopped at realization. They did not go into transformation. Have you understood that? Very, very important. Realization and transformation. What is the difference? What happens in realization? And what is the difference between a transformation and realization? That's liberation, but in realization, you need not change your nature. The ego and the outer nature will continue. You just stand back from it. Yes, in realization, there is no change of nature. There is no transformation of nature. There is no transformation of the physical being, the mental being, and the psychic, and the vital being. It is just what he's just read, what I told you to practice. Go back, detach yourself from your outer nature and live in the inner nature, the inner mind, the inner life, the inner vital, which is connected to, and that detachment so that you don't get identified with your outer being. That detachment, then from there the ascent, that's not all, then the ascent and the descent it is. But it is not the part of transformation. For transformation, what Sri Aurobindo is saying is the psychic being has to be part there. If without the psychic being, there is no transformation. That is why the Mother's coming. So descent of light. You can even have descent of the cells of the body. So many saints have had it. So many great yogis have had that. Not supramentalization, but peace, light, truth, Ananda into the body, yes. So you see, all our stories, every one of our stories, anger, sex, every one of them. Which one haven't? Outer nature's always been, when they come out into that, they immediately change. Inner nature is very, very highly realized when they're into that samadhi, that state, no? All, whether it's, what are these main, I don't think there was Vishwamitra, whole of Mahabharata, all those great... Right, so it's clear now. A certain mastery can indeed be achieved, but mastery is not transformation. The change made by it cannot be sufficient to be integral. So, for that, it is essential to get back beyond mind being, life being, body being, still more deeply inward to the psychic entity, inmost and profoundest within us, or else to open to the superconscient highest domains, or else to open to. So he has given an or you enter the superconscious highest domains. For this penetration into the luminous crypt of the soul, one has to get through all the intervening vital stuff to the psychic center within us. However long, tedious, or difficult may be the process, the method of detachment from the insistence of all mental and vital and physical claims and calls and impulsions, a concentration in the heart, austerity, self-purification, and rejection of the old mind movements and life movements, rejection of the ego of desire, rejection of false needs and false habits are all useful aids to this difficult passage. But the strongest, most central way is to found all such or other methods on a self-offering and surrender of ourselves and of our parts of nature to the Divine Being, the Ishvara. So this was Sri Aurobindo's own method. He, when someone asked him, what was your method in yoga? He said, and he's written in Savitri also, I had got into that poise of complete surrender to the Divine Being. So a vast surrender was his only strength. That was his way. He surrendered himself. And of course, for this self-offering and surrender that he talks about as one of the most potent methods to open and to come in touch with the mother and to bring the psychic forward. This is not a surrender that you forget one day and not another day. You have that, it is based on total faith. Because to be able to give yourself to this force, whatever may happen, and to be in such a state of surrender that you are ready to accept anything. You can imagine what kind of consciousness that requires to be able to do that. You understand? So this surrender and self-offering of oneself to the divine, where you have so much faith that you know that whatever may happen, it is the divine's will, and you will undergo it and accept it, and you will offer your being constantly to the divine for the divine's will to do what wishes. It is a tremendous, strenuous, self-giving, in a way that every time any fiber of your being does not accept or goes its own way, you have to bring it back and offer it to the light, to the mother. So each fiber of your being, each thread of your consciousness is constantly opening and self-offering. So this was actually Sri Aurobindo's own way of doing his yoga. So here he says, a strict obedience to the wise and intuitive leading of a guide is also normal and necessary for all but a few specially gifted seekers. As the crust of the outer nature cracks, as the walls of inner separation break down, the inner light gets through. The inner fire burns in the heart. The substance of the nature and the stuff of consciousness refine to a greater subtlety and purity, and the deeper psychic experiences, those which are not solely of an inner mental or inner vital character, become possible in this subtler, purer, finer substance. The soul begins to unveil itself. The psychic personality reaches its full stature. The soul, the psychic entity, then manifests itself as the central being, which upholds mind and life and body and supports all the other powers and functions of the spirit. It takes up its greater function as the guide and ruler of the nature. A guidance, a governance begins from within, which exposes every movement to the light of truth. So every movement of ours is exposed to the light of truth. Anything that happens, when the psychic being comes forward, when the psychic entity begins to manifest, there is a guidance from from within. In fact, Sri Aurobindo listened to this guide, inner guide, a lot. There was this voice he was hearing and he was listening to, that intuitive, quiet thing that nudges you. A guidance, a governance begins from within, which exposes every movement to the light of truth, repels what is false, obscure, opposed to the divine realization. Every region of the being, every nook and corner of it, every movement, formation, direction, inclination of thought, will, emotion, sensation, action, reaction, motive, disposition, propensity, desire, habit of the conscious or subconscious physical, even the most concealed, camouflaged, mute, recondite, is lighted up with the unerring psychic light. Their confusions dissipated, their tangles disentangled, their obscurities, deceptions, self-deceptions precisely indicated and removed. All is purified, set right, the whole nature harmonized, modulated in the psychic key, put in spiritual order. This process may be rapid or tardy according to the amount of obscurity and resistance still left in the nature, but it goes on unfalteringly so long as it is not complete. So this movement is the central motive of the method of the realization of the psychic and the integral yoga. So what he said is that, and all of us have had this experience. There are times when you are close to your inner nature. Your psychic is in front or it influences you because you're turned within. And then you can feel that every wrong movement, wrong thought is exposed. Immediately you feel, oh my God, this thought I am having is something that I should reject. This feeling, this movement, this action, everything is lighted up in the being. Now, can you imagine when this becomes a normal, constant experience? That is when this psychic action is more and more powerful. Therefore, the need. How do you get into this atmosphere of the psychic, where the psychic being comes forward? The way for that is through the aspiration to bhakti, to love, the shine, the samadhi, reading, inner intensity. All of that brings you into that psychic entity within you comes forward. Or at least enough to start influencing. You get the sense of it. That yes, suddenly you feel that you are in that consciousness where everything is so transparent in your own being. Every thought of yours is transparent. You can see where it's originating from. You can see the shadows and the light in yourself. You can see your actions. You can see your movements. You can see other people. Everything is open. That is when the psychic is pressing forward. And this psychic coming forward then becomes the guide and the inner guru, and leads the sadhana and carries on this work of transformation and movement of rejection of all that is false in you, and acceptance and strengthening of all that is true in you, and takes you towards the light, takes you towards the truth, takes you towards beauty and goodness and integral transformation. No, it has nothing to do with the mind. Yes, it is totally spontaneous. The mind is absolutely not involved at all. It comes from within. There's a kind of a movement from within. You feel it in your heart more than anything else. Something that's pushing you, You feel uncomfortable. A sense of unease comes when you're doing something or something that is not in line with your psychic aspiration, and a sense of deep ease and full of peace when you are in line with your psychic being. When you have done something, or when you've thought, or when you feel, yes, now I feel I'm living a full and complete life. So both these experiences of light and shadow come. It depends on what you're doing at that point. So this is the first result. This process may be rapid or tardy according to the amount of obscurity and resistance still left in the nature, but it goes on unfalteringly so long as it is not complete. As a final result, the whole conscious being is made perfectly apt for spiritual experience of every kind. So, as a final result, the whole conscious being is made perfectly apt for spiritual experience of every kind, turned towards spiritual truth of thought, feeling, sense, action, tuned to the right responses, delivered from the darkness and stubbornness of the tamasic inertia, the turbidities and turbulences and impurities of the rajasic passion and restless, unharmonized kinetism, the enlightened rigidities and sattvic limitations or poised balancements. Wow, very interesting word. Balancements of constructed equilibrium, which are the character of the ignorance. This is the first result. I think at the moment he's talking about how the psychic transforms and puts everything into order and harmony and balance in the fully operational life nature, in our outer nature. Now for that to even happen, unless there is the subconscious is also under having that influence, it can't happen. So, but I think what he is going to talk about later is for the subconscious to be totally changed, you will need the supramental.
There's this line over here, na? This process may be rapid or tardy according to the amount of obscurity and risk. Still left in the nature, that's the subconscious.
No, it is subconscious is also, in the nature, outer nature, which is influenced, obviously the subconscious is influencing the outer nature as much as the superconscious is or whatever. But when he says it's not a question of, I think the outer nature of ours has everything in it. But the subconscious itself, when he went down into the subconscious, that is when he realized that it was, it depends on what level of the subconscious you're talking about. Let me put it that way. There are levels where the psychic is very effective. There are certain levels where you need a higher consciousness than the psychic, but it's so far away that we can quite happily forget that and concentrate on what we're doing. Inconscious. Yeah, that's right. For that deeper. Yeah. So the inconscious is something that requires the descent. So, I think this itself, if you have this, is so absolutely, it is something itself that is marvelous, You see, this is the first result of this. The second result is the descent. That will come into it'll enter into all the different layers of the being. Subliminal, subconscious, whatever, So, we still have to read the rest. This is only the first result of the psychic coming forward and leading the being. There are many other results. Okay? I think we stop here today. Let's read this again